to introduce my friend and colleague, Dr. Kelly Davidson, who is an assistant professor of applied economics at in the Department of Applied Economics and Statistics at the University of Delaware. And Kelly is presenting work that with co-author Brittney Goodrich on informational nudges and increasing enrollment in the Pasture, Rangeland, and Forage Rainfall index insurance. So Kelly, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and you are welcome to begin.
Great, thank you, Laura, and thanks for the opportunity to be here, and I appreciate all of you who are taking time to attend today. I'm very excited to present this work, the last bit of data collection I was able to do before the start of all of the COVID lockdown and pandemic, so we got this data just in time, and I'm excited to present on it today. So the Pasture, Rangeland, and Forage Insurance Program is a rainfall index insurance program introduced by the USDA Risk Management Agency in 2007. It's area-based, where acreage is assigned to one or more grids developed by the NOAA Climate Prediction Center. And a grid is 17 by 17 miles. And the program is structured such that indemnities are triggered when rainfall levels fall below a calculated index for the grid where a producer's acreage is located. And that acreage might be hay production land or pasture land or forage. Producers choose index intervals from January to December, and I'll get into more details about what the policy looks like and what decisions look like in a moment. But the motivation for this study is that enrollment in PRF insurance is relatively low. Only 30% of eligible acres in the United States are enrolled, and this is despite it being a subsidized program and there being few alternatives for livestock risk management in the traditional crop insurance policy program. Livestock wasn't necessarily included, and so this is a risk management program specifically targeting livestock producers. Traditional crop insurance enrollment, when you think about row crops, enrollment is upwards of 80 or 90% of eligible acres enrolled. So you can see a stark contrast with that 30% of PRF enrollment. Some potential reasons for low enrollment: it may just not be an attractive insurance option to livestock producers. There may be a lack of awareness of PRF, and so we're interested in how information campaigns can spur enrollment. But then another possibility may be that producers are facing choice overload. It's a pretty complex enrollment process and a lot of enrollment decisions involved in PRF. So that's the real motivation for this study on behavioral nudges. Previous literature has shown that enrolled producers tend to choose policies that actually increase their basis risk. Producers enroll in insurance into the winter months that wouldn't necessarily or shouldn't necessarily affect forage growth, but those months tend to have higher probabilities of payouts. This is the opposite of the program's intent, which is to be essentially drought or low rainfall insurance. So you would want to enroll in months that affect forage growth, where rainfall, if rainfall doesn't occur, then you're experiencing losses in your operation. We would think of this as kind of being bad behavior of enrolling in the winter months sort of as a gamble. Producers thinking of PRF as an investment or a gamble, a lottery, rather than a risk management strategy. Of course, it's more profitable for them to potentially do this, to have a higher probability of payout in the winter months. And it also is more profitable for crop insurance agents who have incentive to sell the riskier months due to the higher premiums in those months. So again, this is sort of the motivation twofold for this study, is that we see low enrollment overall, and then when producers do enroll, they're not necessarily making optimal choices in terms of risk management strategies. Taking a look at previous literature on the US federal crop insurance program for traditional crop insurance policies, there's little evidence that farmers make decisions that align with expected utility theory, making decisions based on expected outcomes. But some evidence that farmer decisions around crop insurance does align with cumulative prospect theory, the Tversky and Kahneman theory, where reference points matters. It matters whether a decision is framed as gains versus losses in terms of a risk management decision. And so our study looks at framing PRF insurance in the way that cumulative prospect theory might frame crop insurance, where the wide frame being a risk management strategy. So whether farmers consider their own farm income, the premium that they're paying for insurance, and the indemnity that they'll receive in making risk management decisions or insurance decisions and enrollment decisions. A study by Babcock found that the wide frame of cumulative prospect theory doesn't necessarily predict farmer crop insurance decisions in the traditional crop insurance framework. However, the narrow frame, where decisions are framed as an investment or a lottery, the farmer's only looking at the premium and the indemnity and not considering their own on-farm losses and gains, does predict farmer crop insurance decisions. So we're designing nudges with these two frames in mind to investigate how framing might impact the enrollment in PRF. A more recent study by Du et al. Suggests that broadening the frames of reference might improve decision-making around crop insurance. So when we think about what we've coined as kind of bad behavior or suboptimal behavior, methods of changing behavior for traditional crop insurance programs have been to increase subsidies, particularly to incentivize enrollment, or to change the program. As Paul just mentioned, in our research, we're kind of looking at, well, rather than changing the program, what might you do with the existing framework of the program? Although the USDA RMA is considering changes to PRF beginning in 2022. So this is a timely study looking at the way that behavioral economics could potentially be looped into some of those changes. Now, subsidies and changes to the program can be really costly and sometimes ineffective. So an alternative might be to implement behavioral economics. In particular, we're looking at a nudge, a subtle cue that influences decisions without taking away the freedom of choice for the producer. Nudges have been, as many of you I'm sure are probably familiar with, nudges have been used in enrollment in 401k, earned income tax credit programs, savings contribution choices, and portfolio allocations as an effective way to encourage either increased enrollment or optimal choices within those programs. To our knowledge, no study in the US yet has looked at the impact of nudges on crop insurance. So this is the first to investigate that kind of opportunity. So our research questions are whether exposure to an informational nudge would increase the likelihood that a producer enrolls in PRF. So kind of a first stage question about enrollment decisions. And then second stage, if the informational nudge is framed as a risk management tool, that wide frame or mitigating the forage loss, compared to a one-time investment or the lottery, the narrow frame of simply seeking an insurance payout, do the different frames of nudges influence insurance choices? And by choices, we're looking at enrollment, but then also months insured in the program. So our takeaways, before we get too far in, I'll give you a snapshot of our key findings. We do find modest evidence that nudges increase enrollment, particularly for the forage loss nudge, or the wide frame of framing it as a risk management tool. Not so much do we find evidence that the probability of payout nudge, or the narrow frame, that investment or lottery frame, increases enrollment. We don't find any effect of nudges on the months of the intervals that are selected for insurance. And we'll come back to some possible reasons why we don't find that. And then when we look at determinants of enrollment, producers with higher levels of risk aversion are more likely to enroll in PRF, which we might expect, but we do suggest that future research is warranted in that department. So as promised, I'll give a little more detail about the pasture, rangeland, and forage insurance before talking about our experimental design and coming back to those key findings. So index insurance is in theory more cost-effective than traditional crop insurance. Traditional crop insurance programs are based on actual yields. They require complex reporting and a lot of oversight to manage, versus index-based insurance is area-based, so there's no reporting requirements. You're drawing from those NOAA weather grids, and it reduces information asymmetries that you might have with other insurance policies. A downfall of index insurance is the opportunity for basis risk to occur because it is area-based, and PRF in particular is drawing from a number of NOAA weather grids. If you think of the grid where a pasture is located being this black box in this diagram, you're drawing from 4 different NOAA weather grids where the weighted average rainfall total for that index might be 1 inch, and say within the same grid, one station reads 2.5 inches of rainfall and another station reads 0 inches of rainfall. If this continues to happen and you have 2 pastures located in the same grid, the pasture that sees 2.5 inches of rainfall is not going to get an indemnity because the weighted average index is only 1 inch. So an indemnity is only going to occur when rainfall levels are less than 1 inch for that 2-month interval. Whereas a second pasture might need the payout because they're experiencing no rainfall, but because it's within that grid where the weighted average is 1 inch, they're not going to get a payout when the payout is needed, versus the rainy pasture essentially is going to receive a payout when they don't need a payout. And so here's a screenshot of the NOAA weather stations nationally. So you can see there's a bit of disparity, particularly out in the west, where you have rangelands and grazing. And this is a popular program where you're relying on fewer weather stations for a particular grid. And so now coming to the complexity of the program. This is the pasture, rangeland, and forage decision support tool, which is available to producers online. And this is what our experiment was modeled after. This is a free tool available for producers and crop insurance agents to access through USDA RMA. And in the first stage, a producer is making decisions about the intended use for the acreage that they are considering enrolling in PRF, that being hay production or pasture grazing land, whether the land is irrigated, organic or non, a coverage level that ranges between 70% to 90%, the productivity of the land, and of course, number of acres to insure. Once a producer makes those selections, the decision support tool algorithm calculates policy variables like the base value of the acreage that's being insured, the total policy protection levels, and also the subsidy levels. So after selecting the number of acres and coverage level and intended use of the land that the producer is interested in insuring, they'll select a percent of value to allocate to certain months month intervals across 11 index intervals for a total of 100% of the coverage. And again, this is what our experiment is really designed on. Well, how are producers selecting the percent of values to assign to the different months? The one caveat is that intervals can't overlap, so you can't insure January, February, and also February, March. You would want to assign value to January, February, and March, April. The minimum percent that can be assigned to any one interval is 10%. And again, it has to add up to 100% of coverage. Now, the benefit of this policy and selecting these index intervals is that it allows a lot of freedom of choice to the producer. They can customize the policy for their particular needs and ideally for the growing months that are most important to their operation. The downfall is that the producers can choose months that don't matter for forage growth and essentially make a gamble on receiving a payout in months where low rainfall would occur, but that those months don't necessarily impact forage growth. Some anecdotal evidence has also shown, we've heard from a number of extension agents, producers, and the like that crop insurance, at least in some cases, are using NOAA data to find the index intervals with the highest volatility. This PRF is an actuarially fair insurance where the most volatile months also have the highest premiums. So essentially, they're encouraging producers to enroll in those months where the low rainfall won't necessarily impact forage growth, but there is a high probability of payout based on the NOAA weather data. So this begs the question of whether months when forage growth matters are equivalent to the most volatile months. And what we know from the RMA data is that on average, winter months are more likely to receive indemnities and so have a higher probability of payout. And so essentially, this anecdotal evidence is showing that insurance agents or third-party companies are encouraging producers to enroll in those winter months. What this means if the producer enrolls in winter months because they're spreading that 100% of coverage over the different intervals is that they're decreasing the percent of interval that's placed in the actual growing season months, again, which is the intent of the program. And so when low rainfall occurs in those growing season months, they either receive a lower indemnity or none at all during those growing season months. We were motivated to look at this study more closely because of anecdotal evidence from participants, particularly in the Southeast, saying that they were no longer going to participate in the program because they're not getting payouts when they actually need it. So based on the complex decisions that are involved and this kind of what we've called bad behavior of gambling on the program, we designed an experimental simulation of PRF decisions. So a survey and economic experiment with real farmers as participants. And those real farmers are making hypothetical enrollment decisions. One caveat being we love to do incentive compatible decision-making experiments, but budget was limited. So in this case, we're looking at hypothetical decisions. But those decisions exactly mimic the enrollment process. And I'll show you some screenshots of what the producer decisions actually look like in our experiment. So they're choosing the coverage level, the number of acres to enroll, those interval of months to insure, and a percent of value assigned to each interval. Producers producers gave us information about where their operation was located. And so they're thinking about a particular plot of land in these experimental decisions. And we populated actual policy information about that plot of land based on their grid ID, which is based on that NOAA weather station grid. So they're making hypothetical decisions, but using actual policy information that's populated from the RMA database. Because we know that hypothetical bias can arise in hypothetical enrollment decisions, we use a cheap talk script, kind of addressing the possibility for hypothetical bias. And then we also invoked consequentiality. That's a technique that's often used in experiments to frame the decisions to participants as this actually impacting policy or having a consequential decision. Consequential impact. In this case, in our case, we adapted consequentiality a little bit, and we asked producers if they would like to share their policy decisions with a crop insurance agent. And if so, we followed up with them with a summary of their decisions. So our experimental design is a between subject design. One of two nudges or a control of no nudge at all was randomly assigned to the participant. Again, the first nudge being that wide frame or framing the decision in terms of forage loss, where we gave the producer information about the perceived months that were most important for rainfall to occur to avoid losses to forage growth. Kind of a limitation of this study is that our forage loss nudge was reliant on self-reported data from participants. There's not nationally available data on forage growth and rainfall at that grid level, so we couldn't auto-populate the months that were most important for rainfall. But at the beginning of the survey, in addition to asking the producer about their grid ID, we asked them to identify which 3 months they perceived were the most important for rainfall to occur to avoid losses to their operation. The second nudge was a probability of payout, or that narrow frame of the risk management decision, where we provided the participant with information about the months where the participant was most likely to receive an indemnity. And that was external information that was calculated using publicly available NOAA data. So our hypotheses are that both nudges, or a nudge in any case, would increase enrollment through reducing the choice overload that the participant faces in the PRF decision. Then we expected that the forage loss nudge, or that risk management frame, would increase the percentage of interval that the producer placed in growing season months, while the probability of payout, or the narrow frame, would decrease the percentage that the producer placed in growing season months. So we're looking, again, enrollment first, and also which months they selected. Now, with the probability of payment nudge, we assumed that there's little overlap between the growing season months and those with the high probability of payment. And we see that in nationally available data. However, in our sample, only 30% of respondents had no overlap between the growing season months and the high probability of payment intervals. So we suspect that that might be a confounding factor in our results. As I mentioned, just before everything locked down, we were able to finish data collection at regional farm shows in the US. We attended one regional farm show in the Southeast and one in the Northeast for a total sample of 262 participants. Our qualifiers were that the participant had to be the primary decision maker on the farm and must be a hay or livestock producer. Participants were compensated $20 for engaging in the experiment and answering the survey. And within the study, they could earn an additional $40 through a risk elicitation exercise. So each participant that agreed to participate in our research first watched an informational video about PRF. It contained information that would be similar to what they might receive at a workshop, for example, an extension workshop. They answered survey questions about their operation engaged in the economic experiment with the randomly assigned nudge treatments, and then also engaged in a risk elicitation activity that was incentive compatible. So again, first, producers made decisions or answered survey questions about where their farm was located so that we could look up their grid ID, and the program would auto-populate their policy information. Then they choose their coverage level, whether it's land for hay or pasture land, and the number of acres that they're interested in insuring. And then we come to this PRF decision matrix, which looks a lot like that decision support tool where you're selecting the index intervals for months. And so this is an example of the screen that the participant saw in our experiment. This being a control, there's no nudge assigned. We didn't select default values for the percent of value. In any case, that's kind of a further piece of this study that could be explored in future research. So participants started with all of the percent of values were 0%, and they assigned the index assigned a percent of 10% or more to index intervals. The premium and subsidy information, again, auto-populated based on their actual farm location. The same decision matrix or decisions screen for a participant that was in the forage loss treatment, where they receive an informational nudge that populated based on their response to what they perceive are the most important months to avoid forage loss on their operation. So kind of a reminder, these are the months that are most important to forage loss. So again, here you see the percent of value is filled in, but the actual participants started with 0. We're just showing you what happens in terms of the premiums and subsidies populating. And here's an example of our probability of payout nudge, where we're telling the participant, according to historical precipitation in their grid, these are the following months that are most likely to trigger an indemnity payout due to low rainfall. So focusing not on forage loss, but on the payout. After the participant made their selections about the policy and indicated whether or not they would enroll in that particular policy, they engaged in a risk elicitation exercise that was based on the Holt-Lowry method. It was incentive compatible, so the producer got a real payout. The program simulated the draw of a white or orange ball, being whether or not which ball was chosen, the producer actually got a payout, and 1 in 6 participants actually received a payout. And so this particular exercise, the participant is making a choice between a certain bet with a small payoff and a risky bet with a large payoff. Then we calculate the constant relative risk aversion based on at what point they make the switch between choosing the certain bet and the more risky bet. So in modeling the impacts of the nudge, we look at a 2-stage model. In the first stage, the participant is deciding whether or not to enroll in PRF. And then a secondary decision is how the participant decides to allocate percentages across those 2-month intervals. These equations are estimated simultaneously using maximum likelihood estimation. And the percentage of value allocated to the growing seasons intervals is calculated as the sum of percentages that the participant placed into index intervals that align with the growing season months. So we have 3 different specifications for the enrollment variable in that first stage. The first being kind of our basic. We asked would the participant actually enroll in this insurance policy, that being a yes or no. So that's the hypothetical enrollment decision. After they've made all of their selections, seen the premium and subsidy information, we ask them, would you enroll, would you purchase this insurance? Then we look at the consequential decision and whether they would actually enroll next year as kind of cross checks about that hypothetical bias. So we're trying to observe whether the impacts are consistent when the decision is consequential, being that the participant said yes, they would purchase the insurance, and yes, they would also like a summary of their decisions so that they could share it with a crop insurance agent. Then at the end of the survey, we also asked participants, will you enroll in PRF next year? And so we have an ordered model of yes, no, or unsure, again, as a cross-check on that hypothetical decision. When we look at the percentage allocated to different growing season months, we just look at the basic would they enroll decision and the consequential decision. Those are the two outcome variables. So I've placed our summary statistics of our covariates here just so you have an idea of what our participants looked like. The average participant was risk neutral. Average farm size was 270 acres. These are small to medium farms in terms of revenue, where gross sales are 25,000 to 49,900. 73% of their income came from livestock, so we mainly had livestock producers, most of whom were beef producers. To our surprise, 47% of the producers were already familiar with PRF, but only 8% of our sample had enrolled in PRF in a previous year. So this is a shot of our results on the first stage model of likelihood to enroll in PRF, with the first column being that basic decision whether or not they would purchase the policy, the second being the consequential if they would purchase it and also wanted a summary to share with their crop insurance agent, and then the third model being whether they plan to enroll next year. And so our key takeaway here are that we see an increase in the likelihood that a participant would enroll in PRF if they were nudged with the forage loss nudge. But we don't see statistically significant impacts for the probability of payout nudge. So in essence, if we look at our average marginal effects, we can say that a participant that was nudged with the forage loss information about the months that were most important for rainfall to occur to avoid forage losses, those participants were 14% more likely to enroll compared to the control. And again, we don't see effects of the probability of payout nudge. So our policy implications for the enrollment decisions are, if the goal is to increase participation, RMA might consider engaging in information campaigns that in particular focus on nudges about forage loss. Information campaigns in general is one of the suggestions that Keith Coble came up with in a review of PRF in 2020. That kind of is being used or as in consideration for those upcoming policy changes. Other implications are crop insurance may be using the wrong strategy. Crop insurance agents may be using the wrong strategy if they're focusing on the probability of payout as a marketing technique. Maybe it's better to focus on forage losses. But this, we think, warrants further investigation. We think it'd be interesting to do much more research on the crop insurance agent incentives and behavior in that kind of middleman decision making. So in our second stage model, again, this is only considering people who said they would enroll in PRF, we then look at their percentage that they allocate to the growing season months. And those growing season months were defined as the months that they identified as being important for rainfall to occur. And we see no impact of our nudge. Contrary to our hypotheses, the nudges were not effective in allocating more or less of the percentage to growing season months. One possibility for why we don't find any impact of nudges on the percent of value allocation, again, that our assumption that the probability of payout did not overlap with growing season months. So we assumed that the months where the highest indemnities were that the months with the highest indemnities did not overlap with the growing season months. But our sample, actually, there was quite a bit of overlap. Only 30% of respondents had no overlap between the growing season months and the high probability of payment intervals. Another possible explanation is that our nudges were too weak, in particular for the interval selections. In hindsight, it might have been better to maybe put the nudge on its own screen before the participant made the decisions. We thought it would be helpful to have the nudge on the same screen that they were making the decisions about the index intervals, but as you saw, the decision screen was already pretty complex, and so the nudge may have been overlooked. And then we also have to question our statistical power. When we did a power analysis, we looked at the number of participants that we would need for enrollment, and we kind of overlooked the fact that we would only look at those who were willing to enroll when we segment our sample to look at the allocation of which months then that they chose. So we have a lower sample for our percentage of percent of value model. In the interest of time, I think I'm going to skip over our covariate effects and just kind of talk to you about what we find in our summary of results. But we do have this information available. We dove deeper into the covariates to look at which factors affect enrollment, and then also the percentage that they place in growing season months. So if you're interested in that, we can certainly share that information with you, and it's in our paper as well. But essentially what we find is that in terms of the covariates, producers are more likely to enroll in PRF next year if they are more risk averse, which we might expect, and if they previously enrolled in PRF, as well as if a higher proportion of income comes from livestock versus if they sell a higher proportion of hay, they actually are less likely to allocate percent of value to the growing season months. So in summary, our nudge effects show that there's modest evidence that a nudge framing PRF as a risk management tool, that forage loss nudge increases enrollment. We might have captured some hypothetical bias because those effects don't carry over into our models that are consequential or the model of the decision to enroll next year. And we think that maybe our nudge could have been overlooked on the decision page. So future research, we definitely like to use a stronger nudge. In terms of policy implications, we recommend that risk management education efforts kind of focus on that forage loss component, encouraging participants or encouraging producers to think about the months that are most important for rainfall to occur so that they avoid losses, to kind of counteract that tendency to enroll in months where they might receive higher indemnities. We find that marketing strategies that focus on that probability of payout might not be the best strategy for crop insurance agents. Again, would encourage them to focus on educating and communicating with farmers about the months to avoid forage loss. And this was kind of a first stab at using behavioral economics to think about federal crop insurance program decision making. And so we think that the evidence that we find here certainly warrants further research, not only for PRF, but also in terms of other federal crop insurance programs. We would love to be able to do this experiment and also make it incentive compatible, so we can kind of take out that question of hypothetical bias. So something similar to what we've done here, but making it incentive compatible would be a great next phase of this research. In terms of the data that we have available here, we want to explore those determining factors more, in particular looking at how the growing season months differ. So those months that the participants reported as being important for growing, how those vary by grid and county, looking at how producers see the flexibility of the program, and a bit more of exploring what participants learn about, what are the characteristics of participants that do participate in PRF. And then also, again, as I mentioned, exploring the role of the crop insurance agent would be an interesting extension of this work. Only 47% of our sample had heard about PRF at all, and of those 35% had learned about PRF from a crop insurance agent. And then we also collected some follow-up data, and actually are in the process of collecting follow-up data with our participants via email to ask about their actual enrollment in PRF for the year that followed when we spoke with them at the farm shows. So we can actually look at, were the nudges effective in their actual decisions, including we've asked for copies of their summary statements for PRF enrollment. So I appreciate your time. It's exciting to get to share this work. And we especially want to say a thank you to our funding agencies, the Northeast Extension Risk Management Education Center, as well as the Southern Extension Risk Management Education.
Great, Kelly, thank you. Appreciate the presentation, really good information. Just as a way of quick introduction, I'm Mark Masters. Work with Paul and Ken at CBEAR and serve as the outreach director there. And of the 4 seminars, I was most keenly interested in this one because, as you can see behind me, I'm a Southeast cattle producer who knew very little about this a number of years ago. And I'm one of those folks that said, you know, it's probably not really worth it to me. So this was really, it was informative to me, certainly from an academic standpoint, but just as a farm producer in the Southeast, it was really interesting. So thanks to those of you who have been putting your comments in the chat. Got a lot of good questions up for discussion. We'll start with I guess a couple of clarification questions, Kelly, if you don't mind.
Sure. Speak
about why some intervals make more sense than others for forage. So why is that something that the program is based on?
Sure. So if you think about your farm in the Southeast, for example, there are certain months where you would want rainfall to happen in order for your pasture or your hay to grow. Typically, that's going to be like your late spring to summer months in the Southeast, versus in the winter that I don't know if you would call it crop, but the forage is dormant, right? So if rainfall occurs or doesn't occur, it's not going to affect it as much because the forage is not trying to grow at that time of year. So you want rainfall to happen when you need it, right? And if it doesn't happen when you need it, that's when the losses occur and you might not have enough production to be able to feed your livestock or to have available for sale if that's your one of your sources of revenue.
And so we also had a couple of questions about the consequentiality. And so you presented some results, and I think Laura had also put some stuff in the chat about the 53% of farmers expressed that they would be interested in receiving that information. Curious if you had any sort of anecdotal evidence from producers that you talked to, you know, what did they actually share it once they received it, or anything along those lines?
That's a really good question. So we didn't follow up. And in fact, even in our follow-up survey, that would have been a good question to ask. We emailed them, the producers that wanted that summary, we emailed to essentially right after the farm show that we talked to them to give it to them in time for the actual enrollment decision. So like the first farm show, we talked to them in October and the deadline for enrolling for the next year was in November. So we got it out to them right away. We just emailed a summary. I never even got responses from a single farmer. We sent them from our university emails, and we just hope for the best that they got them. So I don't know what they actually did with that information afterwards, unfortunately.
Yeah. Maybe a potential opportunity for some follow-up there. So kind of shifting back to the intervals versus, you know, the whole year, we had a question in the chat, you know, why, and you spoke to it partly in terms of just the differences in the year and the growing season for forage and all, but we had a question specifically about, you know, why not just have annual coverage versus, you know, have coverage for the whole year versus the months in which they might experience drought. It would make a simpler program and avoid, quote, bad decisions. Mm-hmm. Why not just have yearly coverage?
So I think the intent of the program design is because you have differences in regions in the US, right? And so this is a national program. And so the rainfall needs in California are going to be quite different than the rainfall needs in here in Delaware or down in Alabama. And so the interval selections are a way to allow the producer to make the choices based on their own farm within a national program. So it does allow that flexibility, but with the flexibility comes the opportunity for the, quote, bad behavior.
And so to that point, you mentioned early on, you know, there was some anecdotal evidence from producers in the Southeast that abandoned that program. Were you able to kind of delve a little further as to why? I mean, is it all based on just the highly erratic nature of rainfall in the Southeast, and you never really know what you're going to get and all that sort of thing? Or what do you think is the cause of that?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has to do with that. I think it's one of those cases where essentially I think it's a gambler's fallacy, right? If you enroll in a number of years and you never get a payout, and then you decide, well, I'm not going to enroll this year, and then that's the year that you need it. I think that tends to happen. So that might be part of it. Yeah, I'm trying to think. We had a lot of conversations with a lot of farmers at the farm shows because they loved to kind of hang out and talk after the study, which was great. But I can't remember any particular. I think my co-author Brittney would have a much better sense. She's an extension economist, so she gets out in the field a lot more often with the farmers. But that's definitely something that we could follow up on.
Appreciate it. So shifting gears a little bit, there was a question or a comment related to the prior participation. So did prior participation significantly reduce the positive response in the second set of results? And any thoughts on why?
So prior experience increased the likelihood that they would enroll, and that's kind of consistent with what we expected because the program essentially auto enrolls for the next year. You have to opt out of it, I'm pretty sure. But what we find is that prior experience decreased the allocation in the growing season months. So you can think of more farmers chose to take that gamble on the higher probability of payout in the growing, if they had prior PRF experience. And so that probably comes with how much they've talked to their crop insurance agents about the program, and sort of learning about how the program works and how the payouts work. I would just sort of hypothesize is what's driving that effect. Oh,
yeah, my bad.
okay.
So it's kind of a two-parter. I think is really good. Someone in the chat asked, did you consider if farmers implemented other risk management strategies, like in terms of diversification or paring down herd size or whatever? So that was number one. And then could it be that farmers perceive the PRF not as kind of a complementary thing to these other classic insurance products?
So we didn't ask necessarily about self-insurance, so things like paring down herd size or savings or things of that nature, off farm income. I think even we didn't look at in this particular study. We do have that data, but we did ask about whether they had experience in other USDA livestock programs as well as federal crop insurance programs. And so if they had other federal crop insurance programs, they were less likely to enroll in PRF. But if they had other USDA livestock program experience, they were more likely to enroll. So there is definitely some kind of learning behavior that happens with experience with other USDA programs and other insurance opportunities for livestock producers. But those
I'm sorry, Kelly?
I was going to say that a nice follow-up would be to ask about kind of mitigation strategies. Yeah.
What proportion of the sample put all their allocations into the 3-month pairs that are most important for forage growth?
I don't have that off the top of my head. That's a good question.
All right. We'll Stephanie, thanks for that question. We've got all these captured in the chat, and we can circle back on that.
Perfect.
I think we've probably got time for maybe one more. Do you think some of the stuff you had there on the end, kind of next steps? What about an opportunity to change incentives for the actual insurance agents in order to maybe increase the effectiveness of this program?
Yeah, so that's we had a lot of big ideas when we were designing this experiment, and running an experiment with insurance agents is definitely something that we've kind of thrown around and has been on the horizon. We'd love to look for funding to be able to do that. I think that's a key component because you have to go through a crop insurance agent in order to enroll in PRF. And so understanding the incentives of insurance agents and opportunities for behavioral strategies to influence insurance agents is really a key question or a key component that we can't overlook in this, right? We can inform and nudge and give workshops to producers all we want, but we also really have to understand what's going on with the crop insurance agent and in those discussions in order to really impact the program.
Well, Dr. Davidson, thank you very much for your time and your presentation. Thanks to all of you that participated and your questions. I guess a couple of housekeeping things. There were a couple of questions, comments in the chat that we were not able to get to, but we've got them captured and we'll reach back out to you by email. I think as was mentioned prior, this recording and all of the recordings and material from this entire seminar series will be available on our CBEAR website, centerbear.org. And last but certainly not least, a big shout out once again to Laura Paul for organizing all of this. Our attendance on these has really been fantastic. So thanks to all of you for being here today, and we look forward to seeing you on a future seminar.